Okay, so when I get asked, I always say that my favorite wrestler growing up was Chris Jericho. He was, don't get me wrong, anyone who's ever seen me with 4 or 5 pints inside knows that WWF debut era Y2J comes pouring out of me like nobody's business. But if I'm honest, I am romanticizing the past a bit. You see, while Jericho is definitely the one for me looking back, at the time I was probably more of a Triple H guy. I'd make my parents tape all of his matches, asked for that The Game t-shirt one Christmas, and would even do that weird water spray thing whenever walking onto the pitch at Sunday League football. But since his WWF debut in 1995, it's almost impossible to say there's one defining version of Triple H. From Connecticut Blue Blood to Youthful Rebel to literally the man upstairs, there have been so many versions of the man that it's impossible to catalogue. Except, obviously, it's not, because my name is Adam Cleary and these are the many faces of Triple H, ranked from worst to best. Number 12, the DX Reunion. As great as a career as Triple H has had, there was also that incredibly embarrassing, unself-aware DX reunion in 2006 and then again in 2009. They relied on making fun of short people and rampant homophobia. The two also squashed everyone in their path, damaging and holding back a ton of careers along the way. It was more sad than anything watching two literal dads pretend they were still rebellious youngsters. And given we knew that Hunter was Vince's son-in-law, it was just a bad mess. Let's move on. Number 11, The Authority. Yes, Triple H has been part of sillier acts, and we'll get to those in a bit, but he hasn't done anything as destructive to the air quotes business as his run in The Authority. In the summer of 2012, Raw went from 2 to 3 hours in the hopes of getting extra programming fees. The company needed fresh faces and new ideas, but instead just went back 14 years to try and recreate Vince McMahon's success as the evil authority figure. Just this time with Triple H and Stephanie. Hunter turned heel by screwing Daniel Bryan out of the title, in the process stomping on the most organic movement the company had seen in a generation. Even though fans forced Bryan back into main events, Hunter and Steph blasted him at every opportunity. Here they said, you just cheer for Batista, you idiots. Wasn't without some good matches, of course, but fans simply weren't interested in watching the married couple recreate their own act from the year 2000 and began leaving in droves. Number 10, Terrorizing. Now, to be completely fair, very few wrestlers ever take to the first gimmick they're given, and I could do an entire list on some of the best/worst ones, would God grant me that 25th hour in the day, but Christ alive, Terrorizing! Oh, horrendous. Number 9, Hunter Hearst Helmsley. WCW's Jean-Paul Levesque was a rich, snobby man who had a really terrible French accent. When he grew tired of his lack of opportunities in that company, he bolted for the WWF, where he became a rich, snobby man who had a really terrible, name. Despite being served up as a sacrificial lamb for the Ultimate Warrior, he displayed enough raw talent that management, and more importantly the Clique, saw something in him. The gimmick was more growing pains, sure, but it was at least the start of something good. Number 8, Papa Hunter. This is probably the role that he should be in full-time right now, but he's still holding on to this extremely part-time wrestling career, and Christ mate, please just call it a day. Whenever Trips would show up on NXT or recently single-handedly lead their invasion of the main roster, he's pitched as the proud father figure. The man who supports all the young talent and who gives us wrestlers that WWE would never otherwise have had any interest in. Austin Aries, Samoa Joe, Becky Lynch, Shinsuke Nakamura, Bayley, Kevin Owens, all wrestlers Vince wouldn't have looked twice at until Hunter molded them into bona fide stars in developmental. However, while he's giving us WWE's most critically acclaimed style of wrestling, he still occasionally rocks up and plays heel number 1 on Raw. It is weird, it is narrative breaking, and I just wish he'd stop. Number 8, The Last Outlaw. As Trips reached his mid-40s, the company put in a in case of emergency break glass stance on him. He was waiting in the wings to come back and work if a big star came down with an injury or if there was a hot program he wanted to be involved in. However, WrestleMania has always been a time for him to come back, and it's been far more damaging than it has lucrative. In early 2011, Hunter had been largely absent from TV, but he emerged to challenge The Undertaker for WrestleMania 27. His reasoning was that now that Michaels had been retired by the Deadman, those two were the last of the Outlaws. But Hunter took on Taker at Mania 27, Mania 28, and then battled Brock Lesnar at Mania 29 before finally moving more firmly into a backstage management role. For longtime fans, it was still fun to see him step back into the ring, but not a whole lot else. Number 7, the COO. After being away since WrestleMania 22, Hunter returned with the unenviable job of telling Vince it was time to go and that he instead was now in charge. He then ran Raw, but the roster wasn't having it. So he re-signed CM Punk, but got Kevin Nash to stick him or something. There was a phone and I can't remember. When Nash found himself unable to work the planned angle himself, Hunter stepped back in the ring and beat CM Punk. Then there was a vote of no confidence by the Raw roster, and then he was replaced by John Laurinaitis, who was then later fired somehow, and then Vince just came back anyway with almost zero explanation. It was just a bit of a mess, to be honest. Number 6, the greatest of all time. At the end of the DX run, Triple H blew out one of his quads again and had to take some time off. Upon his return to battle King Booker, he became known as the King of Kings and was treated in awe by the announcers, even given a standing ovation upon his return. The question of whether he was the best ever started to be raised by the announcers as he battled the likes of Randy Orton again and John Cena again. He was out to write himself a final great last chapter, one where he could create a few stars on the way out. While he did some quality work with Jeff Hardy, his matches with Khali and Kozlov were downright garbage, and he had one of the weakest WrestleMania main events of all time. That was, of course, at 25 with Randy Orton again. Number 5, the DX sidekick. In 1997, Hunter finally got rid of his ridiculous aristocrat gimmick and, along with Chyna, Shawn Michaels and bizarrely Rick Rude joined forces to create DX. They were supposed to play heels, but their anti-establishment shtick got over big with the fans. Despite playing a supporting role in all of this, he got over in his own right with his whole "let's get ready to suck it" catchphrase. While management wanted to keep the remaining Kliq members apart on air, they did the wise thing and paired up the duo because of their natural chemistry, and it paid off brilliantly. Number 4, the corporate ministry. At WrestleMania 15, Triple H turned on his degenerate buddies and helped Shane McMahon defeat X-Pac. He took on a new look by getting a haircut, wearing traditional wrestling trunks, and started dressing in black. Along with Chyna, he signed on with the corporation, which then later merged to become the corporate ministry, and he got one of the best entrance tunes ever. No ads, please. It didn't take him too long for fans to accept him in a top slot, as after a feud with The Rock with their heel and face dynamic switched up, he was entered into his first pay-per-view main event as a solo act against Mankind and Steve Austin. While he came up short at SummerSlam 99, the following night he captured the gold against Mankind and established himself as a major player in the business. He was finally away from stables and finally out on his own, well, mostly. Number 3, Evolution. Evolution, as well as being a mystery, is one of the best stables that WWE has ever come up with, and each wrestler in it benefited greatly from being a part. Ric Flair finally got the respect he was due again from the wrestling world, Randy Orton became the World Heavyweight Champion, Batista became a top star, and Triple H solidified himself as probably the most important wrestler in WWE. From 2003 to 2005, the group waged war on the roster in various forms. Both Orton and Batista spent significant amounts of time on the sidelines, but Hunter kept the group together and led the war against the rest of the company. It was an important time for the wrestling industry as WWE became the true major league of the business. While the product was very hit or miss at the time, Hunter's reign on top with Evolution was one of the best things they had going. Number 2, the DX leader. Shawn Michaels called it a career at WrestleMania 14 as his back was giving him too much trouble. This left the WWF with some big problems. Not only had they lost arguably their greatest in-ring worker, and apologies to Michael Hamfler for that, but HBK's incredibly popular DX stable was now without a leader. Triple H was propelled into the role and excelled to such an extent fans almost forgot all about Michaels. The night after Mania, Hunter announced he was taking over the group, X-Pac joined the company, and they began their face run. The chemistry between the two stars, Chyna and the New Age Outlaws, was one of the most entertaining things to watch in the entire Attitude Era. Number 1, The Game. Triple H became a star in late 1999, and up until his injury in 2001, well, I'm not going to say he was the best wrestler in the world, but he certainly had a case. He was in great matches with Steve Austin, The Rock, and Mick Foley, and finally turned into the top guy the company was hoping he'd be. He was young and hungry and up for the task of carrying the company on his back. As Austin was badly injured, The Rock eyeing Hollywood, Foley retiring, and The Undertaker becoming a bit stale, Hunter stepped up his game and became their MVP. While he might have started out at the bottom of the clique, by this point he'd become the most powerful one in the business. The rest of his career is a mixed bag, sure, but it's safe to say he was never quite the same after his quad injury. Still though, what a f***ing ride. So there you have it, those are all the many faces of Triple H ranked from worst to best. Read to you by a man whose favourite was indeed the number 1 pick, because if you paid attention at the beginning, that's the t-shirt I asked my man for. Let me know what you made of it all in the comments below, and of course don't forget to like, share and subscribe. In the meantime though, thank you so much for watching. I have of course been Adam Cleary, and I will see you soon. Goodbye.